All right. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about AI, artificial intelligence, AI. Now, a lot of people are talking about AI. And in fact, I've seen a few reports that have come out recently that show that AI is internal audit's biggest risk. Now, it is not internal audit's biggest risk. In fact, AI is not even a risk. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later in the video. So let's just start off with kind of a general discussion about AI. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit about why I don't believe it's the biggest risk, and not that it's not an area you should be focused on, but it should not be the biggest priority for internal audit. And I'll explain why in that. And also explain a little bit more about some other areas that actually may be a much better use of your time, a much better priority for you to focus on this year. Okay. So with AI, everybody's talking about AI. People are asking questions. The board is asking questions. But to begin with, a lot of people are not really clear about what we're actually talking about when it comes to AI. And so one way that I explain to people, and I think I may have done this on another live video, I'm not sure, but especially for internal audit, is to think of AI in two different ways. Okay. The first way is how your organization is actually using AI, and therefore what sort of internal audit projects you may want to perform, whether those are advisory or assurance related activities. Okay, so that's kind of the first area of AI for internal audit to be thoughtful of. Okay, not even necessarily concerned, but to be aware of. The second one is how internal audit is actually using AI in its processes. Okay. Now, for both of these topics that I've talked about, nobody still really knows exactly what to do with either one of them. But what's most important is that you remember that there are two different things for you to be thinking about. And so, like I said, I've seen some reports that have come out where it's like 60% of people say that AI is internal audit's biggest risk, and we really have to focus on it this year. Now, are you the kind of person that just believes what everybody says? And if that's the case, then you're probably running around with your head cut off like a chicken, thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about AI? Okay. Relax, breathe. Okay. Uh, if you look at who is putting out a lot of those reports, they're consulting companies, they're technology companies, they're people that want you to buy AI services. Okay, so first off, anytime you hear somebody, talking about that, see who it's coming from and whether or not they're really just trying to sell you something. Okay, just to be honest with you. And again, I'm not here to try to sell you anything about AI, but there are people out there that are doing this. Okay. So they're going to be blah, 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 AI, AI, AI. Oh my gosh, AI, AI, AI. You got to blah, 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 blah. Right. And then they want you to buy a big consulting project from them. Okay. So temper what you hear from other people versus what's actually going on. Okay, so that's one of the first points of this for you to think about, right? And again, I'm not saying AI is not something that we should be aware of, but it should not be your top priority. Probably in 99% of the internal audit groups that are out there, AI is not your top priority. It's not your top risk. Okay. Now, let me just talk about that for a minute. Because I told you at the beginning of the video that AI is not even a risk, but you see it referred to as a risk all the time, right? AI risk, AI risk, AI risk. Well, what is risk? The definition of risk is an undesirable effect on achieving your objectives. Okay. So AI is not a risk itself. It is not an impact. It is an event. AI is an event that can represent either an opportunity or a threat to the organization, an opportunity or a threat to maybe your internal audit department. But it's not the impact. Okay. It's not the impact. That's not, so AI is not a risk. It can be a threat. It can be an opportunity, again, depending on what your objectives are. So for somebody like a Chat GPT, hey, AI is a great opportunity. It's not a risk to them per se. It's an opportunity that translates into the effect of an opportunity is a reward. That's why companies are spending billions and billions of dollars on AI, because they see a huge reward, a huge amount of revenue, a huge amount of cash flow coming from AI. Now, others are looking at AI and maybe parts of it as a threat, right? Well, it can threaten certain things. It could screw up our customer service, right? What if AI doesn't handle our customer service the way we were expecting it to, and we piss off all of our customers and we lose a bunch of customers? Well, the impact of losing those customers, that's the risk. But AI is not the risk, right? Loss of customers, loss of cash flow, lower revenues, and what that impact calculated as, that's the actual risk, not AI itself. Okay. And so again, hopefully you're getting that, but let me explain a different way. You would not say my company has social media risk. Social media is not a risk. Social media is a thing that can be an opportunity or a threat to your organization. But what would those be? Well, we've seen some huge issues with social media where they have been threats to organizations. Large companies have had social media faux pas that have pissed off their customers, dropped them from number one in the industry, right? And as an example, Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light is an example of that, where there were some things that were put out on social media, some things that went viral on social media, some advertising, if you will, that happened as a result of that angered a huge customer set that bought Bud Light. And what was the effect or the impact or the calculated risk of that? It was the loss of those customers. It was the loss of revenue. It was the loss of being the number one selling beer in America to dropping to third or fourth or fifth place. I can't even remember where they went to. But it allowed other beer brands to jump over the top of them. Okay. But again, it's not social media that's the risk. Social media just happened to be one of the ways in which, right, these events actually transpired into an effect. Okay. So again, AI is not a risk, even though people are tagging that term with it. Now, it can be an opportunity. It can be a threat to your organization or to you. So what could that look like? Well, again, I said, remember, there were two different ways of thinking about this: how your organization is using AI. Now, the way they're using AI, it could be a threat. It could threaten your ability to meet your objectives, right? Like if people, for example, are using AI, they're putting company data out in the open internet to use AI. Well, that can have a threatening effect on your organization. that can lead to a risk. But the risk is not AI. The risk is loss of data, loss of confidential data, right? And so confidentiality of data is a classic IT risk caused by AI. But again, AI is not the risk. It is an event that represents a threat or opportunity. So obviously, if a lot of internal auditors are looking at this and saying, hey, if we have people in our organization that are using AI, but they're letting our data get outside of our firewall, that is a threat that leads to a risk. Therefore, maybe from an internal audit perspective, that's an area where you perform a project, an assurance project or an advisory project to make sure that the company's confidential data does not get to where it's not supposed to be, that it remains confidential, that people who have access or availability to the data are only those people who should have access to it. Okay. So that's an example of where it could be a threat, which leads to a risk, which obviously means, hey, maybe internal audit should take a look at it. Now, on the flip side, it could be an opportunity for your organization. You may look at it from maybe a customer service perspective and say, hey, as an organization, we want to use AI because we think it's going to make us more competitive. We think it's going to help us lead to higher levels of customer service. Great. That's an opportunity that you're looking forward to as a reward. Now, another area where internal audit may want to look at it. If this is a key strategic objective to the organization and you're using AI to take advantage of that opportunity, then perhaps your management would like to know that their plans around AI are going to lead to the expected reward. That again could be another area where internal audit could provide assurance or advisory work in that area. Okay, so that makes total sense, right? And again, but is that the top priority for your organization? Probably not, unless you're in this specific AI space, a technology company that's using AI like that. Then maybe it is. But for most organizations, that does not represent a top risk to your organization, right? There's plenty of other risks that are out there that are more important for you to focus on from an audit standpoint. Now, the second area that I talked about, right? How internal audit is actually using AI. There's many different applications. Some people are starting to learn, ways that they can maybe write reports easier, right, by using AI. There's other ways of maybe doing some test work, of replacing humans, right, of allowing the computer to do more of the test work. And again, that's fine too. For you, that may be a good application, but it's probably not the top priority for your internal audit group. It's an area for you to become more efficient, right? But what's always important to remember is before you're concerned too much about becoming efficient, you want to make sure that you're effective. You want to make sure that you're effective first. So what can that look like? Again, I coach chief audit executives all the time. I have the audit leader forum where we talk a couple times a month. And, honestly, even though we've talked a lot about AI, it's more about managing the expectations of your executives and managing the expectations of your board more than it actually being the real thing, right? Because internal audit is still trying to prove its value to the organization in most companies, right? And so there are typically bigger areas of priority for you to focus on, bigger priorities in developing relationships with other people in the organization, other ways of maybe showing your value through cost avoidance, through cost reduction, through some of these other things. Those are probably a better use of your time than just jumping in and going and buying an AI tool and promising that you're going to reduce the headcount of people in your organization, because that's probably not going to happen. Right? What's going to happen instead, you're not going to reduce headcount, but maybe you're going to slow the increased headcount that needs to happen. Maybe the headcount that you have is going to be able to be deployed to higher and better uses, right? And so maybe you change how your staffing is done. Those are some of the areas that may be more important for you to be concerned with. Now, another area where, again, is an area that is probably, or I'm going to say, should probably be a higher priority. Again, you have to decide. But in one of the other reports that I saw, what was unfortunate is there continues to be a misalignment in what internal audit thinks are the highest risks in the organization and what the highest risks actually are, or what people are saying that they are. Okay, so as an example, this is from an audit board report. Again, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just sharing some information that they put out there for you to consider. But as an example, they call changing economic conditions in their list is the number 2 risk. Okay, but it's the number 11 audit effort. So what does that mean? Well, apparently, again, based on however they did this survey, that is showing up as a top risk for organizations in general. However, it's not the second audit effort, which means, where you're placing most of your attention, where your projects are coming from, you've got that pushed down to number 11. So there's a big misalignment between what maybe your executives and your board think are the highest risks and what you're actually doing, what your work that you're doing actually is. Another example, fraud risk is seen as maybe the number 10 risk, okay? But it's the number 3 audit effort. And so what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of people are auditing for fraud, but maybe organizations don't actually feel like fraud is as big of a deal as internal audit does. Again, a misalignment. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you're spending all of your time auditing areas that don't appear to be the highest risk for your organization, that doesn't look good for you. Okay, because your executives and your board are then saying, well, why are you spending all this time on fraud when we've got these other 9 risks that are a bigger deal, but you don't seem to be doing anything about it, right? So that misalignment is probably a priority where, again, if I were in the chief audit executive chair today, that I would be focusing on. What do your executives and board actually see as the top risk to your organization? And is your audit effort aligned with that? Until it's aligned with that, you're never going to be seen as valuable like you want to. Because people are looking at it and again saying, why are you spending so much time on fraud? Fraud is such a little thing. Why don't you help me with this big thing over here? And the more that you can help people with the big things, the more valuable you are going to be seen in the organization because you're actually helping people with real problems. Okay, so that's an area where I would suggest your priority is better spent than just on AI. Another one, okay, and this was to me shocking. And again, I don't agree with the changes necessarily to most of the IIA's new global internal audit standards. I don't agree with the topical requirement mandates and things like that. But one thing I do agree with is that they put more information in there about having a strategic plan and following a strategic plan. Now, why is that important? Because if you're not following a strategic plan as an audit group, if you don't have a strategic plan as an audit group, it means you're just doing tactical things. And when you're talking to people who spend their whole day on strategy and thinking strategically, but all they see you doing is the tactical, again, doesn't show that you're really an executive in the organization. Okay. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because in this same report, 41% of people say strategic planning isn't critical enough to displace other responsibilities. Now, that number is probably low. The number is probably higher than that. It's just the people who took this survey, so again, we can say maybe half of the people that are in internal audit say, no, strategy is not really important. I've got all these other things that I have to do. I don't have time for strategy. Well, if you don't have time for strategy, where are you going to be in a few years? If you're only focusing on the doing, right, the tactical things, you will never see the strategic things coming. And so again, that's probably, again, in my estimation, a better use of your time is to actually think about strategically for internal audit, where do we want to be? Yeah, I know there's a lot of things like, SOX or internal controls over financial reporting, other maybe regulatory projects and things like that you have to do. And I understand. I know that most internal audit shops are understaffed. I understand that. I get that. But if you're an audit leader and you're not spending some of your time each day, each week, each month, actually thinking strategically and making strategic plans for where you want to go, you may not be in the role for very long. Because the problem is, again, if you're only doing the tactical, you're never actually getting your department, your organization to where it needs to be, right? And again, for each internal audit department, that's going to look different. It's going to be different for each person. It's going to be different for each group. And you really just have to kind of dig into it. What are some of the strategic things you'd like to accomplish? Hey, we'd like to be seen as more valuable. We'd like to be seen as a more trusted advisor. Okay. What strategy are you going to use to do that? Now, I think one of the reasons why people say it's not important is a lot of people in internal audit don't understand strategy. In fact, I was speaking at a conference a little while ago with risk managers, and there was one of the executive sessions was about strategy, and I was floored. I was literally floored as to how many of those risk executives, and again, these are chief risk officers of large organizations. When we tried to have a discussion about strategy, how many of them didn't even know what strategy was? So maybe I'll start talking a little bit more about that too. Because again, it's important as an audit leader to think strategically, to have a strategic plan, and to actually then put the tactics in place to accomplish it. If you don't, you're probably not going to be as relevant to your organization as you could be. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for today. And again, AI is not internal audit's biggest risk. It's not even a risk. And there are probably some other areas of priority where you would be better suited to spend your time this year. And again, I'm not saying to not be aware of AI. I'm not saying not to do some things about AI. But if you see AI as your top priority, I would have you consider and actually seriously think about if that really is true or not. If you're just listening to what other people are saying and just doing what they're saying instead of doing what's best for you, for your team, for your organization. So to wrap up, for now, and we'll see you on the next video.